Deep inside your DNA lie the genetic footprints of two ancient ancestors. Scientists have finally traced their true origin, rewriting human history and revealing the ghosts hidden within us all. You carry them right now, in every cell of your body, and you've never met either one. One is called Y-chromosomal Adam. The other is mitochondrial Eve. They didn't live together, they never met, and they weren't the first humans, but they are the reason you exist exactly the way you do. Every man alive today can trace his father's father's father all the way back to one single man. Every human alive today, male or female, can trace their mother's line back to one single woman. Not a myth, not a metaphor. A measurable, testable genetic fact written into your chromosomes right now. Follow the mutations far enough back, past your grandparents, past every name your family ever forgot, and the trail doesn't just fade into mystery. It ends at two real people walking the earth hundreds of thousands of years apart from where you're sitting right now. This is their story, and by the end of it, you'll understand it's actually yours too. You have 22 pairs of autosomes, 1 pair of sex chromosomes, and a separate stash of DNA hiding inside your mitochondria. Stacked together, that's roughly 3.3 billion base pairs, the raw code that decides everything about you, from eye color to how your body handles stress. Buried in one specific piece of that code is a signature nobody can fake. If you're carrying a Y chromosome, you're male, and that single chromosome behaves unlike almost anything else in your body. Here's the part that makes it powerful. A mutation that shows up once in a man gets copied and passed straight down to his sons, generation after generation, like a signature stamped onto every descendant after him. New mutations don't erase the old ones. They stack on top, layer after layer, building a record that just keeps growing. Scientists realized they could read that record like a timeline. Compare the Y chromosomes of men living today, count the differences, and you can work backward to figure out how closely related their paternal lines actually are. Two men who share almost none of the same mutations split apart from a common ancestor a long time ago. Two men with nearly identical patterns share a father figure much more recently. Multiply that comparison across millions of men worldwide, and something remarkable happens. The lineages start converging. Branch after branch merges backward in time until they all collapse into a single trunk. One man. Every single Y chromosome walking around on Earth today, in every country, every ethnicity, every bloodline you can name, traces back through an unbroken chain of fathers to that one point of origin. Not a legend passed down through generations, a conclusion pulled directly out of your own cells, sitting quietly in your DNA this entire time, waiting for someone to finally read it correctly. That one man has a name now, and it's Y-chromosomal Adam. Not because he was the first human, not because he was special in his own lifetime, and not because he was even aware of what he represented. He was just an ordinary man in an ordinary population, living his life like everyone around him. The only thing that separates him from every other man of his era is that his male line never broke. Every other man alive at the same time either had no sons, or his sons had no sons, or somewhere down the chain the line simply ran out. Y-chromosomal Adams didn't. It survived, unbroken, all the way to you. Scientists traced this by studying the mutations layered onto the Y chromosome and calculated backward to when the split had to have happened. The estimates put him in Africa, likely somewhere between 200 and 300,000 years ago, though different studies have placed the number anywhere from 60,000 years ago to well over 300,000. Here's where it gets stranger. There's a second figure, tracked the same way, but through a completely different piece of DNA. Mitochondrial DNA passes exclusively through mothers, so tracing it backward reveals the most recent common maternal ancestor of every human alive today. She's called mitochondrial Eve. The name pairs them together, but don't picture a couple. They likely lived tens of thousands of years apart, in different populations, never crossing paths, never aware the other existed. Adam and Eve share a title, not a timeline, and definitely not a relationship. What they actually share is a mathematical inevitability. Every lineage, traced back far enough, has to converge on a single point, simply because populations shrink, branches die out, and eventually only one thread survives intact into the deep past. This video follows Adam's descendants specifically, tracing the path his sons and their sons carried out of Africa and across the entire planet. Adam's Y chromosome didn't stay in one piece for long. Mutations accumulated, and every new mutation created a fork in the road, a split between men who carried the old pattern and men who carried the new one. Follow those forks forward, and you get what scientists call haplogroups, clusters of men who all share a specific set of inherited mutations, branching off the same ancestral trunk like limbs off a tree. The first split happened around 150,000 years ago. Adam's original line broke into two groups, labeled simply A and BT. Group A stayed close to the root, barely changed from the ancestral pattern. Group BT carried something new, a fresh mutation that would go on to define almost every other man alive today. 50,000 years later, BT split again, this time into Group B and Group CT. Group B's descendants would remain rooted primarily in Africa. Group CT carried the mutation that mattered most for what came next. Because CT split one more time into Group DE and Group CF, and this is the fork where the story starts to leave the continent. Notice the pattern here. Every split is a point where one population quietly diverges from another. Not through migration yet, not through anything dramatic, just through the slow accumulation of copying errors passed from father to son. Multiply that across hundreds of thousands of years, and you get an entire branching tree encoded in the Y chromosomes of billions of men, each one a living leaf on a specific branch. Each branch a record of a decision point that happened before written history existed to record it. You are standing at the tip of one specific branch right now, and the branch remembers everything. Groups D and E emerged from DE, and groups C and F emerged from CF, all around 75,000 years ago. And this is the moment the story stops being purely genetic and starts becoming geographic. Around this time, the earliest modern humans were living across the African continent, and a portion of them began pushing outward toward land nobody in their lineage had ever seen. Not everyone left. Groups A, B, E, and a branch of D called D2 stayed put, remaining in Africa while the rest of the world sat undiscovered. But groups C and F, along with a branch of D called D1, crossed into territory beyond the continent, into the unknown stretch of Eurasia. Here's the detail that reframes everything you think you know about your own ancestry. If you're not of African descent, your paternal line almost certainly runs through Group CF. Not Group A, not Group B, the ones who trace closest to Adam himself. Group CF became the effective founding line for nearly every man living outside Africa today, which means the version of Adam's legacy that populated the rest of the planet wasn't the oldest branch. It was a relatively later mutation, carried by a specific group of men who happened to walk in the right direction at the right time. Everyone descended from them inherited that decision, encoded permanently in a chromosome none of them chose and none of them could see. The men who stayed became the ancestors of one story. The men who left became the ancestors of almost everyone else on Earth, and they didn't know it yet, but they were about to walk directly into an ice age. The world these men walked into looked almost nothing like the one you live in. Europe and North America sat buried under continental ice sheets thick enough to bury skyscrapers, up to 3,000 meters in some places. The Himalayas, Northeast Asia, and the Kamchatka Peninsula carried their own ice fields. Sea levels sat roughly 120 meters lower than today, which sounds abstract until you see what it actually exposed. NASA modeled what the planet looked like with the oceans drained down to ice age levels, and the result is a world laced with hidden highways. The Persian Gulf wasn't a gulf at all. It was dry land, offering a direct route into South Asia. The Gulf of Aden nearly closed completely. Java connected to Borneo, New Guinea connected to Australia, Taiwan connected to mainland Asia, along with the western edge of the Korean peninsula. And far to the north, the Bering Strait, the stretch of ocean that now separates Asia from North America, was simply solid ground. All of it stayed walkable until around 15,000 years ago, when the ice finally began its long retreat and the sea swallowed the paths behind it. Somewhere beneath those waters right now, there are almost certainly traces of the people who once walked across, evidence of an entire chapter of human movement quietly sitting on the ocean floor, out of reach, waiting. This wasn't a single dramatic exodus. It was generations of people, slowly following food, following herds, following the land as it revealed itself, with absolutely no idea they were tracing a path that would one day be reconstructed from the DNA of their descendants. Every hidden bridge on that map is a sentence in a story written in your own chromosomes. Before I show you the last part, if you want to look at your own results and see where human migration fits into your bloodline, I put a full 3-volume PDF bundle over at the OriginDNA website. It shows you how to read your raw data and find matches beyond what Ancestry or 2, 3andMe tell you. Link is in the description. But stay right here because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. Haplogroup CF didn't stay together for long once it left Africa. Somewhere in Southwest Asia, roughly 75,000 years ago, it split into what scientists now trace as haplogroup CF, P143, though no living man carries that exact baseline signature anymore. It only exists as a reconstructed ancestor, a mathematical midpoint between where it came from and where its descendants ended up. Its direct ancestor was CT. Its siblings were the DE line. Its children were groups C and F, and between them, they would go on to define the paternal ancestry of almost the entire non-African world. Part of the CF group crossed what's now the Persian Gulf, back when it was dry land, and pushed into South Asia. Another part moved into West Asia instead. In South Asia, roughly 62,500 years ago, Group F emerged. In West Asia, about 53,000 years ago, Group C emerged. Group F turned out to be almost absurdly successful. Its direct descendant, haplogroup FM89, went on to represent the vast majority of all non-African paternal lineages alive today. Nearly every man outside Africa you could name traces back through this single branching point, whether he's from Norway, Peru, Vietnam, or anywhere in between. Meanwhile, Group C fanned out on its own trajectory entirely, carrying its lineage toward Europe, toward Australia, toward the vast stretch of Siberia. 2 branches, born out of the same split, heading in almost entirely different directions, both quietly becoming the ancestral backbone for billions of people who would never know each other's names, languages, or continents, yet share this exact fork in their family tree. From haplogroup FM89 came a direct descendant called HIJK, and from there, the branching accelerated into a genuine dispersal across the planet. Descendants of Group K pushed toward New Guinea. Somewhere between 40,000 and 36,000 years ago, Group O emerged and spread across East Asia, eventually becoming one of the dominant paternal lineages across China, Korea, and much of Southeast Asia. Group P pushed a different direction entirely, advancing into Central Asia and crossing the brutal stretch of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the driest, most hostile environments on the planet, on foot, with nothing resembling modern survival gear. Group C, meanwhile, kept spreading on its own separate arc, reaching into Europe, into Australia, into the vast cold expanse of Siberia. Picture the map at this point. You have one single splitting lineage, starting from one man in Africa, now fanned out across 4 separate continents simultaneously, each branch adapting to wildly different climates, wildly different food sources, wildly different challenges, all while carrying the same underlying signature buried in their Y chromosome. None of these groups knew the others existed. There was no communication, no awareness of a shared origin, no sense that they were living chapters of the same unfolding story. They were simply following resources, following opportunity, following the next valley or coastline that looked survivable. And yet every single one of them was walking, unknowingly, along a route that scientists would eventually reconstruct thousands of centuries later, using nothing but the mutations quietly copying themselves inside their descendants' cells. The most successful expansion in human history was happening in complete silence, recorded nowhere except inside the DNA of the people living through it. Then the planet turned against almost everyone. Around 33,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum began, the point where the Ice Age stopped being merely cold and became something closer to apocalyptic. Ice sheets swelled to their largest extent, smothering northern Europe, huge stretches of North America, and large sections of Asia. Drought spread, deserts expanded, sea levels kept dropping as more and more water locked itself into ice. By roughly 26,500 years ago, the glaciers reached their absolute widest point, and the planet's ecosystems buckled under the pressure. Large mammals died off in waves. Modern humans came uncomfortably close to their own extinction during this stretch. Some genetic reconstructions suggest the surviving population may have dropped to as low as roughly 10,000 people, though the exact number is still debated among researchers. What's clearer is how brutal the era was more broadly. Neanderthals and Denisovans, hominid lineages that had endured for hundreds of thousands of years, did not survive much beyond this window. Every single person alive today, all 8 billion of us, descends from whichever pocket of humans happened to make it through. Every branch of the Y chromosome tree that survived this period did so by circumstance as much as resilience, being in the right valley, near the right resources, missing the worst of the worst. The tree could have ended right here. It didn't, but only barely, and the mutations recorded in your own chromosomes right now are proof that your specific lineage happened to be one of the ones that made it through. Relief came slowly. Starting around 20,000 to 19,000 years ago, the ice in the northern hemisphere finally began its retreat, and the descendants of Group P, who had already crossed the Taklamakan Desert generations earlier, pushed further, spreading into Siberia and northern Europe. From within that expansion, Group Q emerged, and from Q and its relatives came Group R, a lineage that would go on to become one of the dominant paternal signatures across Europe. But the real turning point happened at the edge of the map. Descendants of Group Q, along with descendants of Group C who had settled near Siberia, reached the far northeastern edge of Asia and kept walking, straight across the Bering land bridge, the same stretch of now submerged ground you saw earlier, into a continent no human lineage had ever set foot on, North America. An ice-free corridor opened up between two massive ice sheets, the Laurentide and the Cordilleran, and through that narrow gap, descendants of Group Q pushed even further, all the way down into South America. Meanwhile, other descendants of Group Q, who had stayed behind in Central Asia, turned in a completely different direction and advanced into the Scandinavian peninsula. Look at what just happened. A single lineage, born from one man in Africa nearly 250,000 years earlier, had now split into branches occupying Siberia, Scandinavia, and two entire continents on the opposite side of the planet, all without maps, without writing, without any concept of how far they'd actually traveled. They were simply following open ground as the ice let go of it, generation by generation, completely unaware they were completing one of the largest migrations in the history of any species on Earth. Around 15,000 years before present, the Earth's climate lurched violently. Temperatures spiked rapidly, nearing modern levels by roughly 14,500 years ago, and then, without warning, crashed back into cold. By around 12,900 years ago, the planet plunged into a roughly 1,000-year deep freeze known as the Younger Dryas, triggered when meltwater from the collapsing North American ice sheet flooded into the Atlantic and disrupted the ocean currents that regulate global temperature. And this single climate shock became one of the greatest turning points in the entire human story. Hunter-gatherers, pushed by the sudden cold, began settling down for the first time, domesticating grains, then goats, then sheep, in the region known as the Levant. The agricultural revolution had begun, but settling down didn't bring peace. It brought surplus, and surplus brought something new, resources worth defending, which meant groups needed protection, which meant early organized conflict, largely lost to time, but visible in the genetic wreckage it left behind. A study published in Genome Research in 2015 uncovered something startling. Roughly 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, women's genetic diversity worldwide kept climbing steadily, while men's diversity collapsed sharply, worldwide, at the same time. One widely discussed explanation, though still debated among researchers, points to warfare. Losing clans weren't just defeated. Their men were wiped out entirely, erased from the family tree, while the victors' bloodlines multiplied forward. More recent research has pushed back on that, suggesting the same pattern could emerge peacefully, simply from how patrilineal clan structures inherit and expand over generations. Either way, the genetic signature is real and traceable. Roughly 4,000 years ago, an early branch of Group R, called R1b, migrated out of West Asia into Europe, and some pushed back into Africa. Compare the genetics of people living in Europe 10,000 years ago to the people living there today, and their strikingly different lineages, with R1b's expansion representing one of the biggest turnovers in that record. 200 and some odd thousand years. That's how far back this trail runs, from one ordinary man in Africa to the 8 billion people walking the planet right now, including you. Every fork in that journey, every ice sheet, every land bridge swallowed by rising seas, every population pushed to the brink, every conflict fought over grain and territory before anyone thought to write anything down. All of it is still sitting quietly inside your own chromosomes at this exact moment. You didn't inherit a story. You inherited the evidence. Somewhere in your Y chromosome, if you're male, or in the maternal line every human carries regardless of sex, there's a signature connecting you directly back through this entire chain. Through Adam, through the ice, through the crossing, through the silence of people who never once imagined they were being watched by descendants who wouldn't exist for hundreds of thousands of years. Mitochondrial Eve's side of this journey follows a different path entirely, one traced through mothers instead of fathers, and that trail deserves its own telling in another video. But this piece, Y-chromosomal Adam's piece, ends here, with you, holding a copy of a message that started walking out of Africa before language, before agriculture, before anything you'd recognize as civilization existed. The ghosts aren't hidden that deep after all. They're written into you, right now, waiting. If you want to keep following this trail, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, don't let your DNA results just sit there unanswered. Tap the link on the description to download your ebook and find out what your raw data is hiding.